If Dauntless gets bars and tattoos, then the farming people should have purple sticky punch and orgies. The whole idea behind them gives me Wanderlust vibes, and I like it. Anyways, here's Divergent, from somebody who did not read the book series, but did see this movie 10 years ago. And also the second movie, almost 10 years ago, but not the third. It's a post-apocalyptic world, and some of Chicago has survived and is rebuilding itself into some kind of utopia. But it's divided into 5 factions based on your dominant characteristic, but really it's just based on what job you want. You could be in defense, you could be a farmer, you could be in law, you could be a social worker, defense, law, healthcare, social worker, or a farmer. Now, everybody's born into one, and until you turn a certain age, which online it said 16, but I don't remember them ever saying it in the movie, to which point you're supposed to take some sort of brain evaluation, and it'll tell you which one that you're, like, better suited for, but you can still choose whatever the fuck you want, so really this test, like, doesn't mean anything. Well, this girl, Beatrice, she grew up in the social worker aspect, and she goes to take her test, and come to find out that she's a little bit of everything. She's brave, she's unselfish, she's, what's that word, like pragmatic or whatever. She has a little bit of characteristics of all 5, and they can tell this because she tackled a dog in her little dream scenario evaluation thing, and that makes her divergent instead of one of the other 5 fractions. Which, like, isn't everybody kind of divergent? I mean, if you're one of the farmers and you're afraid of spiders, but you have to get around a spider to pick an apple, doesn't that mean you're also brave? If somebody falls down and gets a boo-boo and you have to put a band-aid on it, doesn't that make you also really good in the healthcare field? Are people who don't work in the healthcare faction banned from band-aiding any kind of OEs? I don't know, but what I do know is if they find out you're divergent, they will kill you. Who, you might ask? Well, you might think the government. Or you might think it's that whole faction that covers, like, law and government and whatever the fuck else they do. And you would be semi-correct, because it is that faction of law and order or whatever, but it's technically not the government. Because apparently, the social worker faction controls the government. Which also makes me ask, why the fuck do we even have a faction that studies law and government in the first place then? Or why are they not considered the government? Their whole job, their whole life is now reading and interpreting the law. So why are they not in charge? Or why is there one faction in charge? When you made this, why did that seem like a good idea? Shouldn't you have just taken representatives from each faction to create, like, a government? And, you know, Kate Winslet's over all this, but is she a president? Is she a CEO? I don't know. So Beatrice was in the social worker faction, and her dad was, like, part of the government. And then she takes her test, and she finds out she's divergent, and she goes to the little ceremony thing, and she chooses to be Dauntless, which is, like, the defense system, which they're cops, and they're also soldiers, but they also like to run around and climb over everything, so I think they're, like, a parkour team. Well, she goes and trains with them at, like, a little boot camp thing. And they're learning to do all sorts of shit, like fight and throw knives and shoot guns. You can imagine. Well, then she gets involved with her superior, which is not a good thing. And somehow, through all of this, we find out that Kate Winslet, who's in, like, the Law and Order faction, or whatever, is planning on overthrowing the social worker district so that they can lead the government. Even though, again, they should already be, because their whole thing is studying law. And they're going to do this by injecting the Dauntless with, like, the super soldier serum and making them basically wipe out the entire social worker district. But the serum doesn't work on Divergence, and that's why it didn't work on Beatrice, and how she managed to, you know, save everybody. Sort of. That's pretty much it. That's the movie. Oh no, I forgot to tell you, if you fail at your training to be in your new little faction house place, you have to go live with the unhoused factions. Or the unfractioned? Unfractioned. Which I guess is like a little society of its own. So I guess if your brain is more creative than it is, like, brave or good at paperwork, you're fucked. And apparently, like, 90% of the Dauntless job is just to keep the fractionless in order. Which makes me ask, okay, but what if you grew up with all this doctor training, And then, you decide you want to be dauntless, but you can't pass the physical agility of it because it's fucking hard. You have to run everywhere. You got to jump on trains. Shit like that, right? But you're still a really good doctor. But you can't go back to your fraction once you move fractions. So now you gotta be unfractioned, and that's a waste when you've got a fucking good doctor. Now you're denying your society a good doctor because they have to follow this rule that you can't go back to your original fraction. Or what happens if you're like born into the doctor fraction but you can't stand blood? So up until I guess you turn 16, do you have to just deal with it every day until you can pick something else? I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 10. I mean, it's cool to look at. And Eric, who's like the evil superior in this, is like an absolute hate fuck. He's an absolute douchebag, but he's pretty to look at. Yeah, like a 5 out of 10. Very basic, very mid. Wow. Okay, bye. So I ask myself in the water what a warrior would do. Tell me underneath my armor, am I loyal, brave, and true?